Hello guys, and welcome to my tutorial about how sessions work in Unreal Engine. So basically how you can host a game for multiplayer and how other players can then find that game that you hosted in multiplayer and join it. By the way, if you guys are interested in this little project, it's available on our Patreon. You can get these project files and take a look at this yourself or use this in one of your projects. So let's get to it. Inside of my tutorial project here, I made a sessions folder, and in that sessions folder, I've already created some widgets which will help us understand how the sessions here work. So we have a create a session widget, a find session widget, which is basically a server browser. Then we have a join session widget, which is an item in the server browser. So when we find sessions, this is the item. And eventually, once we go from the main menu level into the gameplay level, then at that point we can also leave the session. So the first thing I want to talk about is what are sessions and how do they work? Well, basically Unreal Engine has what is called an online subsystem installed. And the one that is standard integrated is what we call the Default Online Subsystem. So what is an online subsystem? Well, as it says here on their own documentation page, an online subsystem is an interface that provides a common way to access functionality of online services such as Steam, Xbox Live, Facebook, and PlayStation and Epic Online Services. So what does that mean exactly? What is that interface and what is that online functionality? Well, look at it like this. Imagine that you are at home on your own local network, right? And that you host a session using Unreal Engine's Default Online Subsystem and the nodes that Unreal Engine gives you by default. So these are the nodes: create session, find session, join, and destroy. So imagine that you host a session on your own local network, and then that is running on your PC. So your PC is then running that session. Then in that scenario, you cannot expect that other players who are not on your own home local network can find your hosted session. So what can you do? Well, if you host a session in your own local network, then your home PC 1 and your home PC 2 could, for instance, find the session and join each other. So if we take a look at that over here, if I host a session here on the left for 2 players, if I create that and I enter the session here, then on the right here, I can hit find session, and then it will look for my sessions. Then eventually here it will find my local network hosted session, and it will say 1 out of 2 players, 34 ping, and I can then join that game. So as you see, I'm now connected to my own session here hosted on my local network. But let's say that I want to host a game and have other people find it. Well, for that, the online subsystem really comes into place. And especially 2 popular ones at the moment are Steam and the Epic Online Subsystem. So here we have the Steam store. Steam has an integrated backend solution for us, which allows for us to host matches on their network, and then suddenly our local home network can find other matches through their system. And so does Epic. So we have Steam as an option for this, and we also have the Epic Game Store as an option for this. But do keep in mind, when you publish your game on Steam, then most likely you will use the Steam Online Subsystem. And when you publish your game on the Epic Store, then most likely you use Epic's Online Subsystem. Because these subsystems do not only make sure that you can have proper matchmaking, no, these systems also ensure that you have, for instance, your friend list, or that you have, for instance, Steam achievements, etc., etc. So these subsystems do a lot more. But by default, Unreal Engine has these nodes for us. And what we can do by default is simply create sessions, find them, join them, and eventually once we leave them, we can destroy them. And from these sessions, we can get some information. So let's say you find a session. Here you have a return of all the sessions that have been found on the subsystem that you are currently using. And from that session result, you can then get information, and the information that is available for us by default is this information over here. So we have get current players, we can get the max amount of players, we can get the ping of the session, and we can get the session server name, which in case you are hosting a session on Steam is your Steam username, in case you're hosting a session on Epic, it's your Epic username, and in case you're hosting a session on your local home network like this, it's the name of your PC. And we can take another look at that over here. If I host a session over here and find it here on the right, then we will see, since I am now using the Default Online Subsystem, that it will return my PC name, which is hosting that session. Then let's talk about how you can get these nodes here. What you're going to do is right click somewhere in your graph. So typically you would do this inside of your widget graphs, and you're going to type session. And then if you scroll down a little bit, you will get to this category called online, and then you will see session. And over here, you see the 4 available session functions here and the 4 available pure functions where you can get information from the sessions. So if you click over here on create session, for instance, you will get this node and then you can install it in the corresponding widget. Alright, so now that that's clear and that we have kind of an understanding of what a subsystem is, then let's look at how you can find other players on the subsystem. Well, it's basically like this. Imagine that you're on your own home local network and that you are then connected to Steam and your game is integrated with the Steam Online Subsystem. At that point, when you host a session, it will no longer be available over here, but it will then be available on the Steam Online Subsystem. And then some other player that is also connected to the internet from his home, and some other people in the world can find that session. And that's where the online subsystems come into play. Now, if you don't want to make use of Steam or Epic's online subsystem, then there's other solutions as well. So some popular solutions for that in that case are, for instance, Microsoft's Playfab. So Playfab is a huge backend as a service solution, and it gives us the following features. So you can host your multiplayer servers there, you can do content management, you can have your game economy there, you can also have leaderboard and statistics, and things such as achievements and overall just data management. So you can basically store player information and stuff like that. And then you could, for instance, not use Steam Online Subsystem or Epic's Online Subsystem, but in this case you could then make use of Playfab's matchmaking system in order to find the matches that you expose. And on Playfab you could also, for instance, here host your dedicated servers, and then these dedicated servers can be found with the matchmaking of Playfab as well. So that's another solution. And besides Playfab, another popular solution is Amazon's GameLift. Alright, then as mentioned before, this is the information that we can get from the sessions by default. So it's not that much information. You cannot, for instance, see the game mode that somebody's playing or the map that somebody's playing in a session and stuff like that. So to solve that, the community has actually made a solution, and that is what we call the Advanced Session plugin. So this is a community plugin, it's free, and you can download it over here from the forum using the link in the description. And this plugin, for instance, gives us a lot more options than what our engine gives us by default. So for instance, over there you can expose the game mode or the map that somebody's playing in, and just show a lot more information in the server browser than what our engine here gives you. Alright, now that we have a good understanding of what sessions are and some of the basics regarding sessions in our engine, then we're going to talk about how we can actually properly integrate these nodes and how you should hook them up. So to do that, I'm going back to my main folder here and tell you guys about the structure that I've set up here. Inside of my blueprint folder, I have set up a little main menu. It's a simple game mode here with a player controller assigned to it. And all this player controller does is that it starts our UI over here in the main menu. This game mode is assigned in this level over here, as you see. Then in the gameplay folder, we have a gameplay game mode and a gameplay player controllers. And then for that to work, we have a main menu level, and then we have a gameplay level. So what we're going to do here is that in the main menu, we're going to host a session. And then once we host that session, we will travel to the gameplay level in which the session will then take place. And then the second player here from the main menu can use the server browser to find the session that's going on in the gameplay level from the other player and join that player. Alright, so let's take a look at how this works. First of all, we're going to take a look at the create session widget here, and then take a look at the graph to see how we can implement this node. So basically, if we take a look at the node, it asks for 3 things: a player controller, public connections, and use LAN or not. So this is a boolean, which means it's just true or false whether or not we want to use LAN. LAN means hosting it on a local network and not on the internet. Public connections is the amount of players that you want to allow in the session. So if you set that to 8, then a maximum amount of 8 players can join in your session, and your player controller is simply your player controller of your game. So that's what it asks us here. So the first thing you're going to do is simply promote these to a variable so that we can then set these. So what I have done over here, and you can take a look at this simple UI structure on the left and copy it, is creating a simple editable text box here in which we can input the amount of players, and then a simple checkbox here whether or not we want to use LAN, and eventually a button which then creates the session. So if we take a look at that, the editable text box simply sets the amount of public connections. So if I input 5 is set there. The checkbox says whether or not we are using LAN, and eventually when we hit the create session button, we actually create the session. Now, the first thing you need to understand is when you create the session, you have to use this function over here, and you get it by typing open level. And once you got that, you want to put the level in here, which you want to travel to when you create the session. So in our case, we are in the main menu level and we want to travel to our gameplay level. And then the second thing that you have to know is that in the options here, we have to put listen. And what listen means is that we create a listen server. So that means that all the clients basically listen to the host. And that's what is also known as the client server model. And that's the multiplayer model that Unreal Engine integrated by default. So you can test that model. If you click here on the top and then go to net mode, then over here we see listen server, which is a server client model. So one player is a host and the other players are clients and join that host. All right, so this is the only setup you need in order to host a match. So we then take a look at that. If I simply type in a number like 5 over here, for instance, and then hit create, then we travel to that gameplay level in which we can then run around and have our gameplay logic. That's all for hosting a level. Then let's talk about how we can find sessions and then join them. So if we take a look inside of the find session UI, all this is a server browser. So it's basically a scroll box here. And once sessions are found, the scroll box will get populated with these sessions. And these sessions, I use this widget for it, join session widget. And all this really is basically a horizontal box having a server name, having an amount of players here, and having ping as a text, and then a join session button. So to explain this join session widget first, if we look at the graph here, then on event construct of this widget, we're going to set our server name. And these are those pure functions that I've shown you guys before over here. So as you see, these functions here, they all ask for a result. So the first thing you're going to do is right click that result and promote it to variable. That's what I've done over here. And then you get yourself a variable of the type blueprint session result. That one, we are then going to make it instance editable and expose it on spawn. What that means is that inside of the server browser, once we create our widgets, then you see that search result here exposed, which means we can then basically fill in the information in the search result variable. So once that variable has been set, then basically we get the server name, we set it, we get the max amount of players, we append that to a string with a slash in here, and then we set that amount of players, and then we get that ping, which is available for us as well, and we set that ping text. So now basically this text, and this text have been set. We're then going to have a look at the server browser, which is my find session blueprint over here. So for the server browser, as you see, my structure is fairly simple. We have a vertical box. In there, we have find session button. We then have a little horizontal box with this checkbox in here and some text. And then we have the session list scroll box, which essentially just is our server list. So let's look at the code here. If we click the find session button, then the first thing we're going to do is that session list scroll box, which I have promoted to a variable. So if you click on it and promote it to a variable, first we're going to clear it. At that point, we are going to disable our find session button, which will indicate to us that we are looking for a session. And at that point, we use the Unreal Engine find sessions node. So let's take a look at this node. This node asks us for a player controller, a max result, and whether or not we want to use LAN. So use LAN in this case means, are we searching for LAN matches or are we searching for online matches? So for that, I used my little checkbox. So this checkbox over here, and that checkbox will set that variable to true or false. And then the max result that it is asking for is basically how many sessions do we want to find and display it to the user. So you can type in 100 here, which will be a very large server browser. But for my example, I've simply typed in 25 here. Then my following logic here is that if no sessions have been found, which means a failure, then basically I will enable that find session button again. So I will set this button here back to enabled so that we can click it again to look for sessions again. And on success, we're simply going to have a for each loop of that result array. So for example, the result session array might return 5 sessions that we have found. And for each one of these sessions, we are going to create our little join session widget. which is this widget, which is basically a server browser item. And on that widget, we are then going to fill in from our array element here that search result. And then we're going to add this widget to the scroll box as a child. So that's the only logic here. And if we take a look at that, then I can host a session for, let's say, 10 players. I can click on host, my session is then hosted. And then if I click find session, the button gets disabled. And after some time, you will see that my session will be found here. And it will display my server name, in this case, the name of my local PC, the amount of players, 1 out of 10 currently, and the ping of the session. And if I hit join, it will then connect to the session and I am then here. Okay, then now that we understand the find session node, let's take a look at how that join session node works. So back in our widget blueprint join session, we have this event for when we click the session button. And here we simply have the join session node. So what does this node need? Well, this node is only asking for a player controller. So simply plug in your player controller. And then the search result is asking for a blueprint session result structure. So like I said before, we get one by right clicking on these functions and promoting it to a variable. You then get yourself the variable over here. We have made it instance editable and we have exposed it on spawn so that we can fill that information in. And that's the session that we're plugging in here as well. And then as you see on the success and on the failure, I have not coded anything. On the failure here, most of the times you would have some feedback to the player displaying what the failure is or that you cannot join the session and that you should try again later. And on the success, we don't have to code anything. That is because our engine by default on the success will connect you to the map of that session. So you don't have to code anything. Simply, if you hit the join session button, you will automatically connect and join that session. What you could do here, and what I do in the multiplayer blueprint lobby solution product, for instance, is that here on success, I then create a loading screen and have that pop up while you're connecting. All right, now that we understand how we can join a session, then let's look at the final thing, which is how we can leave the session again. So let's host one more match for that and let's join it. Join. All right, so as you see, this is now the client here on the right, and this is then the server, the host here on the left. And now this client decides to leave. So what I've made is this little leave session button. And when he clicks it, he returns back to the main menu, as you see. And this guy here will stay in the session. This guy can then also leave the session and return to the main menu. So what do I do there? Well, that's very simple. If we take a look at this widget here, when we click the leave session button, we simply have a destroy session event. And after destroying the session, we are then going to open the level of the main menu here. In this scenario, we don't have to fill in the option string here. All you have to do is fill in the level name that you want to exit to. So what is the destroy session node and why do you need to use it? Well, if you are currently in an active session or if you hosted a session yourself and you don't destroy it after leaving it, then you are not able to host new sessions. So you have to destroy your old session before you can host or join a new one. And that is what the destroy session node is for. Alright guys, I hope I explained it good for you guys and that you guys understand what sessions are in our engine, how you can host and join sessions. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye. Also, we have created a product on the marketplace called the Multiplayer Blueprint Lobby Solution. The Multiplayer Blueprint Lobby Solution has all of these features integrated and much more, such as a whole lobby system where you can ready up, have character customization, etc, etc. So in case you guys are interested in that, we have that available on the marketplace for you as well. Bye bye.